Jews and Christians are coming together in an unprecedented burst of activity. We're seeing a new relationship between Jews and Christians of the 21st century, and it's something that's going to be the most powerful political force in the next few decades to come.
This is a Visegrad 24 series about the Israel-Hamas War.
We're in Tel Aviv for another interview for Visegrad 24, this time with Josh Reinstein, director of the Christian Allies Caucus in the Knesset, the Israeli parliament. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me on the show.
American help has been a fact from day one, whether it was artillery shells, 155 millimeters, or Tamir rockets for the Iron Dome. However, lately there is some problem in Congress with Ukraine as well, but also some Israel aid. They are quarreling right now. Do you believe that American help is important for Israel, especially if it would turn out that this would become a larger regional conflict with Hezbollah and Iran more directly involved?
Well, obviously, America is our greatest friend and ally, and American help is paramount. We get our ammunition from America. A lot of the weaponry that we purchase is from America as well. I think that going forward, we need to have steadfast support. But the question is, at what cost? You know, there's also a lot of pressure. There's also American interests that don't always align with Israeli interests. And so the question is, do we slow down? Do we, keep getting shelled in the north without responding properly because we need American support? The devil's in the details, and I think that we will get the funding that we need to get the missions. We will get the ammunition. We need them. It's important, but at the same time, at what cost? Now, what other people don't understand is that it's not a one-way street as well. There's an election coming up in America, and us going and bombing Iran, for example, would double the price of gas. That'd be a bad thing to have happen there as well. So there needs to be some give and take on both sides.
And with this upcoming election, it's important to remember that in the US, the Evangelicals are one of those groups that is best organized, best funded, and they usually have the ear of Washington, D.C. So these would be some of the Christian allies that I think that you have been building bridges with for a long time. How does this relationship look like, and what is the attitude of the evangelicals towards Israel?
The evangelical support for Israel is the most important support we have around the world. Today it's Christians, not countries, that stand with Israel, and it's Christians bringing their countries to stand with Israel. If you look at the Trump administration as a test case, the base of the Republican Party is evangelical. No Republican can get elected to the House, the Senate, or the presidency without standing with Israel. And if you see in the last administration, you had people like Mike Pence, Mike Pompeo, people who believe in Judeo-Christian values, together with the president at the time, Donald Trump. And what happened? Probably 9 of the top 10 asks that we could ever ask for from America. So the support is unbelievable, but it's not just America. We're seeing it everywhere.
Brazil, for example, has a huge community.
Brazil's a great example. You have a country that has the same amount of evangelicals as America. You got 60 million. A third of the country of Brazil are evangelical. And even though the president is very antagonistic and against Israel, because of that large population, the House, the Senate in Brazil is very pro-Israel. But we see it all over Europe too, Eastern Europe and Africa and Latin America. We're seeing this massive movement of Christians who are saying, we stand with the state of Israel, we believe in the covenant with God and Abraham, and we're going to defend that covenant. And that's been probably what we call faith-based diplomacy, when people take their biblical support and turn it into real political action. That's been the most important weapon that Israel has in its diplomatic arsenal in the last decade.
And how does this relationship look like? Often Christians, they call the Jews our older brothers in faith. There is also the term of Judeo-Christian civilization. And of course, even though there have been problems in history over the millennia, but there is also something that at the same time unites. In the face of this conflict, how important is this relationship with various Christian denominations across the world?
Well, we have to understand that this conflict that we're in, and it's being dubbed as a territorial conflict or a political schism, it's not true. It's a religious conflict, okay? What we're seeing today is radical Islam, who believes that by destroying Israel and taking over the West can bring about the coming of the 12th Imam, which is their version of the Messiah. they're actually taking a plan and they're implementing it to get to that point. Now, Christians and Jews are coming together like never before. We've never seen something like this before because of the fact that Israel was established in 1948, and since then we've seen the fulfillment of all the prophecies that people who believe in the Bible come to fruition. The deserts bloom, the ingathering of the exiles, the dry bones from Ezekiel becoming a nation in one day, becoming a light onto the nations, through our high tech and technology. Children playing in the streets once again, Jerusalem. When Christians and Jews who believe in the Bible saw this happen, they realized that this was God's work. But also on the other side, they're realizing that this is God's work and that this is a threat to them. So we're seeing a coming together of Jews and Christians and people who believe in Judeo-Christian values on one side, and radical Islam and atheists who don't believe in God on the other side, based on their religious perspective.
As you mentioned, that religious component of this war, previously various Palestinian terror groups back in the 60s and 70s, they were either guided by some form of socialist ideology or nationalist ideology. But since the late 80s, early 90s, Hamas has clearly had this radical Islamist agenda. And there are other Islamist terror groups which are also targeting Europe and the wider West. Now, of course, we had foiled attacks by Hamas against embassies in Cyprus, in Sweden. But Europe has also seen a lot of other Islamist terror attacks, especially when ISIS was very active a couple of years ago. Do you believe that this threat is very similar to both the Christian world and the Jewish world?
Well, I think it's even scarier to the Christian world just because it's been ignored. The Christian world is very well spread out, and it's going to be happening on so many different fronts at the same time, whereas there's only one Jewish state. We have an army, we could protect ourselves. But what people need to understand is that this isn't just a phenomenon that's happening everywhere. This has been a very well-directed plan by Iran. Okay, the Iranian government, who's building a nuclear weapon with the help with the West, of giving it, deals and financing and all these things like the JCPOA, is operating proxy armies, not just in Gaza with Hamas and Hezbollah and Lebanon and the Houthis in Yemen, but all across Europe, all across America. Everyone knows that the Iranians tried to kill John Bolton, who is the National Security Advisor, and Mike Pompeo, who's Secretary of State of America. They have cells everywhere. And because it's being ignored by the West and because no one's talking about it and there's no repercussion, they're getting emboldened more and more and more. We had just a few weeks ago this attack on Pakistan. Why would Iran attack Pakistan? Well, because they can. They're showing that there's no limit that they can't break. We have a weak response in the West, and this is emboldening them to attack everywhere. And I'm afraid that it's going to get a lot worse for Europe just because they're not prepared for what's coming.
Yeah, it seems that the alarm bells didn't ring loud enough back in 2015, 16, 17, and there was other years when we had a lot of terror attacks. And now lately, there have been attacks that have been foiled, but no large terror attacks in recent years. Returning to Israel, if we look at the Christian community here in the country, I usually react to the fact that people abroad think that it's a couple of hundred people, maybe a couple of thousand. It seems that they don't really realize just how many Christians live here.
Yeah, it's a massive community. It's a very well integrated community. We're the only free democracy in the Middle East. 2% of our population is officially Christian. They like to call themselves the indigenous population of Christians, Aramaic. But there's also Christians who've come from abroad and from other areas as well. It's a great place to be if you're Christian because of the fact that you have all the rights under our legal umbrella as everyone else who's here. Now, that's not the case in the 22 Muslim countries around the world. So you have a situation where the Christian population every year decreases in the Middle East, but it rises in Israel. What people don't understand is that Christians today are some of the most persecuted and attacked minorities in the world. I mean, you have hundreds of Christians being murdered every day in Africa, in Northern Africa, just for being Christian, in the Middle East, in Asia.
Recently we saw enormous massacres against Christians in connection with Christmas in Nigeria. But there seems that there was no outcry in the world. There were no mass marches taking place in London. Why do you think that is the case?
It's the plight of the Christians are being completely ignored by mainstream media and the political echelon around the world. No one seems to care, and it's a shock to people in Israel who see it. When a Jewish person is attacked in France, there's going to be a reaction from Israel, from the Jewish community, even America. But you can kill thousands of Christians in Northern Africa, in the Middle East. Look what happened in Syria in the Civil War. If you were Christian, you had three options. You can either pay 13 ounces gold protection money, which most people didn't have, convert to Islam, or be beheaded. That's it. They killed thousands of people. Did anyone talk about it? Did anyone speak about it? It's unfortunately a big double standard, and the victims of genocide today are Christians.
Mm-hmm. Then you also have a lot of Christians, maybe not a lot of them, less and less, but especially there are very important Christian sites in the West Bank. Probably Bethlehem is the one that most people think about. What is the situation for Christians like in the West Bank?
Life as a Christian under the Palestinian Authority and the Islamic terror group Hamas is a nightmare. If you look at Bethlehem, which you just brought up, Bethlehem was 90% Christian. 100% of the municipality was Christian before Oslo Accords, before we let the Palestinian Authority take control of that area. Today it's 10% Christian, Bethlehem. No one on the city council is Christian. In fact, they canceled Christmas this year in solidarity with the Muslim community. So the question is, where did all those Christians go? Well, a lot of them were, escaped. Some of them were killed. Some of them were jailed. There are pastors that I know, like from First Baptist Bethlehem, Naim Corey, who was shot 3 times. His church was firebombed 14 times. But of course, you don't hear about it. People don't talk about it because it's the same policy of ignoring the plight of Christians in the Middle East and North Africa.
There are also these videos that are being recirculated online. Often it's videos that are very old because they are being used time and time again of various Christian nuns or other Christians visiting sites here in Israel. And sometimes they get harassed by often young children from Hasidic Jewish families. How does this fit into the propaganda that is being spread from right now the Palestinian cause? And what are these incidents? How can we put them into a perspective?
Well, look, if you look at it from a real perspective, it's very nominal. I mean, these things are happening very infrequently. I don't know of a case of it happening in the last 6 months, for example. It happened last year that there were children who were spitting at Christians as they were walking down the street. Look, it's disgusting and it's being sensationalized, but it's very rare. And it's not a physical threat. It's more of an offense, something very offensive that they're doing. So I think when you're grasping at straws, you can blow up anything to be a big deal. But what about the Christians who are being murdered for being Christians in Bethlehem, in Gaza, in Ramallah? I mean, that's the real issue. I think that the fact that we have freedom for all of our Christian community is something that's a real blessing. And also, if that instance that you're talking about that happened in June with the spitting in the Old City, the Prime Minister of Israel actually came out and made a statement saying how much we love our Christian allies and how they're the best friends we have. My caucus in the Knesset Christian Allies Caucus, is the largest and most influential caucus. So I don't think there's a country in the world where Christian support, Christian standing with Israel is so appreciated as Israel. And the fact that that's the best that they can do to try to demonize Israel, those little videos, shows how safe it is for Christians in Israel.
When it comes to Christian-Jewish relations, a lot of it is taking place in America, where the largest lobby organizations of both religions exist and are trying to impact Washington, D.C. and Capitol Hill, especially as much as possible. However, there seems that sometimes there is some friction, that cooperation is not always going great. Especially some of these Jewish organizations in the US, they are viewed as having a tilt to the left. And because of that, sometimes they oppose some of the things that the Christian organizations are doing. I'm especially thinking here about organizations such as the ADL, for example. But is this a fair view of the situation, or are there other powerful Jewish organizations that are more favorable to the Christian cause that we don't hear that much about?
Well, it depends what issues you're looking at. Okay, when it comes to Israel, the situation was always that we had a stacked deck. We always had Republican support because of Christians, and we always had Democrat support because of Jews. That's shifted, and what's happened is the rise of something called the progressive movement. The progressive movement is inherently anti-Semitic because what they call the 1%, what they're against, the people, those are Jews. They're doctors, they're lawyers, they're people who are educated and work in professions. Now, the problem is that the big box organizations like ADL that you mentioned, they didn't recognize this threat. They said, oh yeah, this is great, we're going to have human rights and everyone's going to be free and everything. And they looked at it from a positive civil rights movement. Now, after October 7th, I think that there's a huge wake-up call to them, because they realize that the people chanting death to Israel in the streets are not the right, it's the extreme left. It's the progressive movement. So you have an organization like ADL whose job is to fight, anti-Israel sentiment, anti-Semitism, anti-racism, and they're becoming part of the problem because they were supporting the organizations who were the ones that are pushing anti-Semitism. You get these absurd things where CARE, the Muslim Brotherhood, is part of the response to the anti-Semitism campaign of the White House supported by ADL. I think that's all going to be changing now. I think people understand who are the good guys and who are the bad guys. And that's one of the things that happened October 7th. The attack, the genocide, was so ferocious and so evil. Rape, murder of babies, beheading of people, kidnapping of Holocaust survivors, that there's a real red line now. If you're for Hamas after that, you're a bad guy, and you can judge people on that way. We know that the Secretary General of the UN is a bad guy. He supports Hamas. The president of Brazil, bad guy.
When we had leaders coming to Egypt, standing on the border with Gaza, it was Pedro Sanchez, the Prime Minister of Spain. And after that, I believe that the ambassador from the Israeli ambassador from Spain was recalled back to Israel to protest. When you see this type of reactions from various leaders across the world, where do you believe that this comes from?
I think it comes from the idea that they can feed the Jewish people to the crocodiles in order for the crocodiles to eat them last. I think they understand that their countries are being overrun by radical Islam. They want to try to placate the radical Islamic elements within their own society. And also there's a huge stream of anti-Semitism. I think Charles Krauthammer said it best. He said that the big surprise isn't that there's anti-Semitism once again in Europe. It's that they've been able to suppress it for so many years. It's always been there. And so you have this mix of people who dislike Jews and together with people who are generally worried about the Islamic threat and say, hey, maybe we can give them the Jews and then they'll leave us alone. The problem is that both of those things are self-defeating. The Jews have always been the canary in the coal mine. But what happens to the Jewish people always happens to everyone afterwards. 6 million Jews died in the Holocaust. 20 times that many people died in World War II. And we see that again and again. So that's why I'm nervous for Europe, and I'm nervous for these countries with these leaders because they don't see what's coming.
You mentioned earlier here the organization in the US, the main umbrella organization for lobbying for Muslims, CARE. In Europe, there's a similar organization, FIOE, the Federation of Islamic Organizations in Europe, with its headquarters in Paris, which is also an umbrella organization for other national organizations. And in both cases, they are very closely connected to, or in reality, they are the Muslim Brotherhood in disguise. What do you believe that people in the West don't understand about the Muslim Brotherhood? Because they are reluctant to open their eyes to this connection between CARE and FIOE with the Muslim Brotherhood. And sometimes I remember during 2011 with the Arab Spring and Mohammed Morsi coming to power in Egypt, that they were saying that, maybe the Muslim Brotherhood, they're not Al-Qaeda, they're not that radical, they're not a threat. How would you respond to those people?
Well, as you know, I run the Israel-Hamas Foundation, and we have 53 Israel-Hamas caucuses in 53 countries, and we have 1,500 legislators in our network that mobilize political support for Israel. And one of the things about Judeo-Christian values and the thing that brings us together is that we want to believe that everyone just wants to be happy and healthy and have a good family and a good outlook. And what we don't understand is that radical Islam does not believe in those things. Like, they don't see the things that we see as advantages as something that is an advantage to them. We think that life is the most important. They think death is the ultimate goal so that they can go to their world to come. So we're looking at it through Judeo-Christian eyes, And we're like, let's be as inclusive as possible. Let's be as open to everyone. But we have to understand that the Muslim Brotherhood is a major threat. They are very well organized a very well financed political organization that want to bring Sharia law, that want to subjugate the infidel within their countries. We saw this with the takeover of Muslim Brotherhood of Egypt. We saw when they called it the Arab Spring, what happened to all those people. Millions of people were killed during that, on this idea that maybe we can work with them. And it doesn't work that way. You know, of course there are great people who are Muslims. There are great people who are in every religion. But the ideology of radical Islam and the Muslim Brotherhood, the political organization that represents that, is evil. And we need to call it as it is.
If you would have one message that you think is the most important that you would like to relay to the world about the situation in Israel after October 7th, what would that be?
I think the big message that people need to understand is that if you don't read the Bible, then you can't understand the newspaper. God is in control here. You know, our first Prime Minister, David Ben-Gurion, said that if you don't believe in miracles in the Middle East, you're not realistic. I think that in order to be an atheist in our time, you need a lot of faith, because God is showing people exactly what he's doing, and it's lining up with what it says in the Bible. And that's why Jews and Christians are coming together. Look, I take great solace in the fact that this story, its past, its present, its future, has been foretold. And there will be peace in Jerusalem. The question is, at what cost? And so people who believe in the Bible and believe in the God of Israel need to come together and say, look, we can either stop this now, or we can let this linger on for a long time. And I see that all over the world. Jews and Christians are coming together in an unprecedented burst of activity. We're seeing a new relationship between Jews and Christians in the 21st century, and it's something that's going to be the most powerful political force in the next few decades to come.
Well, we hope that will be what will shape our future. Many thanks for coming on.
Great to be with you again.